Hi there, and Happy New Year, and welcome to this special edition of the Alberta Update. I am your host, Bruce McAllister. Today, we'll have an in-depth chat, a conversation with our Premier Danielle Smith about the year that was in 2024, and maybe look ahead to what lies ahead in 2025. And with that, we welcome in the Premier. And boy, it's been a year in the last month, it seems.
This is the thing about this job, is just when you address one crisis, and another one pops up. And this has been a pretty crazy end to 2024.
Yeah, look, we've got about a half an hour. I'm going to try and rapid fire us through a few subjects.
Yeah.
They're all so important. Let's start with the situation right now, changing by the day. What do you make of what's happening in Ottawa with the United States and potential tariffs? I mean, how do Albertans view all this?
I would say the frustrating thing that we have is that we don't have a prime minister who has a 4-year mandate. And as a result, he can't go to the table and say, you got to deal with me, I'm not going anywhere. And I think what we're seeing is that the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is kind of taking advantage of that situation and trying to goad Canada and goad the Prime Minister into a response. And so I have argued that we need to have an election, whether that's to give the current Prime Minister a new mandate so he does have that strength going to the table, or whether it's because we need to get a new person at the table. I'd leave that to Albertans and Canadians to decide. But we're in a position where there were a couple of days there where we didn't even know who the finance minister was, and we didn't know who the point person was to deal with the Americans on what is the biggest challenge to our trade relationship that we've seen in a very long time. So the premiers have tried to fill the gap there, but it would be really nice to have a federal partner that was focused on this.
Well, to that point, it seems like you and Premier Ford have been ministers of the federal government. You've been on every U.S. news agency that you can think of. They're now turning to you for comments. You have a little bit of a different position than the Premier in Ontario for obvious reasons. So quantify that for Albertans and why it's important that we take the stand that we do.
Sure. I mean, a few things I'd say is I did have an opportunity to meet the previous trade negotiator, Robert Lighthizer, at an event not so long ago, and got a copy of his book. And the first thing you want to do when you want to understand the American strategy is you read about it. So I'd say there's a few things. One is that in the past, the Americans have been able to use national security as a reason to bring in tariffs. They did that for aluminum and they did that for steel. And that's why I think the border is so important, because if the US president is able to say, oh, we have to secure our borders, it's too dangerous in a national security interest, that becomes the reason to bring in tariffs. So I think they're tied. That's why I think it's important for us to address that very real issue. That's why we announced a $29 million program, sheriff's teams with drug sniffer dogs, with commercial vehicle inspection, drones, identifying a 2-kilometer border that is going to be a critical infrastructure so that we can police it. And then we'll also integrate with the CBSA and the RCMP. So we are showing, we've heard you, it's an issue for us. There's guns coming across the border, there's human trafficking, there's smuggling of fentanyl and precursors, and we don't want that to go either way because it's hurting our people too. So that's the first thing. The other thing I would say is that the interesting part is that the chapter on Canada-U.S. trade irritants is actually kind of thin. We know softwood lumber was an issue. Right. It's tariffs on it. We know that we solved the problem with aluminum and steel by not letting China be a backdoor to get cheap products into the U.S. and replicating what they're doing on EVs, taxing Chinese vehicles. The president has made note of that. But issues around dairy and issues around culture and cultural protections, those are really the only things that they mentioned. And so we're still trying to figure out what is the real issue that we're trying to get to. So let's address the issue of the border. Let's deal with the trade irritants that are real. And let's try to get to a situation on January 20th where none of our products have tariffs on them at all.
Look, this topic could carry our whole half an hour. I want to move on. We may come back to it if we have time. Let's talk about some of the recent changes from our federal government. People are saying it's Sovereignty Act 1 and it's Trudeau nothing. People thought you were a little out there. Your government was out there when you came up with this Sovereignty Act within the United Canada Act. I don't think they think that now.
Well, I think that it was maybe provocatively named, because sovereignty means something different in Quebec than it does in the normal discourse. But what it really means is that we have, under our Constitution, exclusive jurisdiction over certain areas of powers, and the federal government has exclusive jurisdiction over their areas of power. It's a very unique relationship that we have. And so whether you call it exclusive jurisdiction or sovereign jurisdiction, it means the same thing. I can't legislate in the federal government's areas of constitutional authority, and they should not be legislating in our areas of constitutional authority. They keep on doing it, whether it was the proposal for an emissions cap on oil and gas, an emissions cap on fertilizer, net zero vehicles, plastics being declared toxic, or the net zero power grid, and I could probably go on. Mm-hmm. But what we determined in the structure of our Sovereignty Act is putting everyone on notice. We believe the federal government's breaking the law, the highest law of the land, our Constitution. We are going to defend our areas of jurisdiction, and here are the actions we're going to take to defend it. And so after forcing us to go through a year-long battle that not only included billboards and advertising and court challenges and media and getting our friends and allies on side, the Ontario electric system operator said very much the same thing. All of a sudden they said, oh, well, guess what? We were too stringent. It's going to hurt people. So I guess we'll recalibrate to 2050. That's a terrible way to run a country. That is not collaborative federalism. And it validates what we are saying, not only about this issue, but about every single issue that we're having with the federal government on energy. Every single thing that they're doing, whether it's a carbon tax or an emissions cap or net zero vehicles, are going to harm consumers. And they would be far better off aligning all of their policies around a 2050 target that is way more achievable and would put them in sync with what the provinces want to do.
Well, standing up for Alberta was one of the things that you campaigned on, and you certainly have been. Your government has been, your ministers have been. You just touched on some of the things that the federal policies impact when it comes to affordability. Everything is more expensive. Don't have to tell you, grocery stores, gas, fuel, home heating. How do we as Alberta deal with that when much of it is it's Canada inflationary policy, a result of?
Well, I guess that's interesting that you talked about, maybe it was a bit of a slip, but talking about American, because think about what we're going through right now. We have this really bizarre temporary GST cut for 6 weeks because the federal government is convinced this is going to make a difference on affordability. At the same time as we face the threat potentially, or the retaliatory threat, of having 25% tariffs being put on American goods coming into Canada. So this is why we can't get into a trade war with the US, but this is also another example of the pressures that we're seeing in Canada are replicated in the US. We had supply chain disruptions. That's why you want to be able to have a functional cross-border trade relationship. We also have seen out of control federal policy when it comes to printing money. And I don't think that was improved when we saw the fiscal update, seeing a $40 billion deficit grow to a $62 billion deficit. That just increases the price of everything and then ultimately increases interest rates, which makes housing unaffordable. And then, of course, the carbon tax, which is a real irritation. If you look at the cost of gasoline, 35 cents of it is various federal taxes, whether it's the carbon tax or the fuel tax or the tax on GST. It would make a big difference to everyday lives to be able to take that off the cost of gasoline and diesel, take it off the cost of all of the transportation fuels that are used to get goods to market. On top of that, the natural gas tax is 4 times the cost of natural gas. We're in the middle of winter. People need to turn their homes on with heat. They need to get power after 5 o'clock when it gets dark. All of these things, whether it's a home, whether it's a business, whether it's a grocery store, all of these things are adding to the inflationary crisis. And that's why we believe they've gone too far. They have absolutely lost public support on the issue of a carbon tax, and the best way that they would be able to address affordability is to get rid of it.
Right. The carve-out for home heating oil in Atlantic Canada just does not sit well with so many. I know a lot of people in Atlantic Canada that aren't happy with it because it's divisive for the nation.
Well, and it's also smoke and mirrors, and it just shows if you care about emissions, you don't give a carve-out to a type of fuel that has higher emissions than everything else. You don't say you need to have a national carbon tax so everybody pays it, and then give a carve out in Atlantic Canada and leave Western Canada paying higher prices. So they've absolutely destroyed the arguments that they were making at the Supreme Court, which is why we'll see them back in court on this one too.
Yep, purely political. Hey, you went through a leadership vote this year, your members. Tell me about that process, and the result was 91.5% in favor. Your thoughts on going through that and the end result?
The Conservative movement has a long history of having their leaders be accountable for the decisions that they make. We're unlike what we've seen with the Liberal Party, where there really is no way to hold a leader to account on either a leadership review, or presidents saying they want to have a leadership review, or even the caucus saying that they want a different leader. We have all of those mechanisms in our party, and so what it does is it means that your Conservative voter base, those who've bought a membership, they're kind of like a broad-based focus group. They tell you the things they care about, they tell you the things that are irritating them, and you go through and you address those issues. So that's what we've been doing. It's not the sum total of what you do in government, because at any given policy review, you're only able to deal with 35 policies, and sometimes I feel like I have to address 35 policies a day. But you have to be mindful of the things that are causing problems to people, and I hope I've been respectful of that. I listen to our members when they raise an issue. I take it seriously. I think about how we could implement the policy proposals. If we can't do it 100%, I try to do it at least partially, and if we can't do it at all, we have to be honest about the reasons for that. And I think people like that approach.
Now, I always refer to you as solutions-oriented, for what it's worth. Do you know, by the way, which one of your loyal staff members was closest to that 91.5 in their predictions?
I have a feeling I'm about to be told.
You should remember. I think I won the pool with 91%, something like that. Hey, listen, healthcare is always a big subject. You're trying to improve acute care, recovery and addiction. You're trying to make it a better experience for Albertans, make more doctors available. This is a big elephant to take a bite of. Are you happy with where you're at and what you accomplished?
Yes, I'm very happy that the major refocusing took place. I mean, trying to describe what it is that we were trying to do, I'll see if I can do it quickly. We basically gave all the money, all the policymaking decision, all of the ability to contract out, all of the service delivery to one entity, whether it was for primary care, mental health and addiction, acute care, contracting out to other acute care providers, ambulance service, public health, Indigenous health, assisted living, all to one entity. And it's not working. And we tried this experiment for 15 years, and instead of things getting better and better, they got worse and worse. So the refocusing is this. The starting point is, let's have Primary Care Alberta. Everyone should be attached to a family practitioner, and we just announced a nurse practitioner deal. We've got a new deal with pharmacy. We've got a new deal with doctors. We want every single person to be able to have comprehensive care from a family practitioner. That's the reason we needed to do that focus. Second one is mental health and addiction. A lot of the problems in our emergency rooms and in our beds in hospitals are people who are now suffering with mental health and addiction, and they're just in the wrong type of facility, being treated in the wrong way by perhaps the wrong staff. What we need is to get people in the right place, being treated the right way by the right staff. And so that's why we're building out about 1,000 additional beds for mental health and addiction, and put that under Recovery Alberta. The other part was we have the fastest way to get into a long-term care facility in most provinces is to do it directly. Only 50% go through a hospital to get there. In Alberta, 75% of people go into a long-term care facility by way of a hospital.
That's time and resources.
It is $2,500 a day, and sometimes they get stuck, not just for a week or a month, sometimes for years. And so Assisted Living Alberta is going to be under the umbrella of Seniors Community and Social Services. We know we're probably by 2030 about 12,000 beds short to be able to keep up with our aging population, and that's going to be an area of focus. And now, finally, acute care is going to be a multitude of different service providers. We've got AHS, who does most of our facilities. We've got Covenant Health. We've got arrangements with charter surgical centers. And we're going to make sure that we hold each of those service providers to account, deliver an efficient way of getting people in for emergency service and then back out and home or in the hospital and cared for. And let's start seeing an increase in the number of surgeries being performed. So that's the model. Yeah. And now that it's all in place, now we just start making improvements.
You know, I often hear numbers thrown out about doctors. You know, this many Albertans don't have doctors. And then I think that the second part of that report that you often don't hear is the amount of newcomers that we have coming into the province. Now, we actually are adding a lot of doctors. You'll know the numbers. I can't remember them all. But that's an issue that I know Minister LaGrange has been intentional about addressing.
Completely. Well, there's different doctors who do different specialties. Let me speak about the specialties for a minute, because we're not graduating enough anesthesiologists and we're not graduating enough oncologists. And that's part of the problem, is that everybody's poaching from each other and everybody is short. So we have a working group with the premiers to try to understand how many of each specialty are we graduating? Is it enough? And if it's not enough, how are we going to address it? So that's one part. The other part, though, on primary care it was really important for us to get a doctor's deal, because doctors are very highly trained and they don't all have to run a family practice. They can go work in hospital. So what we were finding is that the more of an administrative burden and headache it became to run a private practice, those docs were just not doing private practice anymore. So part of what we need to do is get doctors enthusiastic about primary care again, and to have larger patient panels, and augment that with nurse practitioners. So that's part of what we've come up with our doctor model. The AMA new president was saying that she thinks it's going to be an attractive way to get people into primary care. We have to also grow our own. We've heard in rural Alberta that one of the issues that those communities face is if you get trained in Calgary and Edmonton, you stay in Calgary and Edmonton. So we're training in southern Alberta at Lethbridge now, and we'll be training in Grand Prairie as well, 50 doctors in each of those jurisdictions. And we're also building out other programs for LPNs and nurses in rural Alberta so that we can grow our own workforce. That, I think, is going to be the biggest change in making sure that we attach everybody to the healthcare they need.
It sounds like, when I hear you say this, I know it all is intended for improvement for the patient, but it sounds like, when I read between the lines, it's also intended to make a smoother system for our frontline workers.
Oh, completely. I've been in some hospitals, and I can only imagine when there's a lot of chaos, how difficult a work environment that must be to work in. And so then you can go into some of our charter surgical centers as calm and peaceful. And you just think, why can't we provide a peaceful kind of environment for most of our surgeries that happen in most of our hospitals? Like about 80% of the surgeries we do are scheduled. So we can create a different experience, not just for the patient, but also for the staff as well. And part of it involves making sure that our emergency rooms are not sort of the only point of entry into the system. There's a certain portion of people who shouldn't be there because they should be seeing their primary care doctor. So once we've got them attached there, then that should take some of the pressure off. People with mental health and addiction issues, they should be going to specialized facilities, and that's what we're building, so that also takes the pressure off. And then we want to keep people in their home as long as possible. That's what most people want. So let's have a robust healthcare system or home care system, and then let's find a way to appropriately do assisted living, so that as people start aging, they don't have to go in and out of a hospital in order to get the care they need. And all of that should return hospitals to being hospitals. Hospitals should be the place you go when you have an acute condition that you can go in, get treated, or leave. If you have to have more intensive care, you go in, you get treated, and you get admitted. Or you go because you've got a scheduled surgery. That's what we've got to return our hospitals to, and I think that's the kind of care that our acute care health professionals want to do. So that's what we're trying to restore.
I've heard you and the minister say many times, if you can get into the system and get through it all, we have the absolute best care providers in the world here in Alberta.
Yep, we sure do.
About creating jobs, I read, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that Alberta created 5 times more than the average private sector jobs than the rest of the country. That's private sector, not public sector, because those government jobs to me don't count. You've got to be proud of that, but it is a double-edged sword, isn't it? It means that many more people coming here.
Yeah, every time you have a private sector worker paying taxes, it allows for you to hire more social workers and nurses and teachers and doctors. But if you don't have that private sector growth, then you end up, as we've seen in other jurisdictions, going down a pathway of higher deficits, higher debt. So we know that we want Alberta to be the destination of choice for entrepreneurs, for innovators, for wealth creators, for job creators, because it's a perfect synergy. When we allow for people to take care of themselves and do well, they always give back, whether supporting our public sector and all of the services they care about, or because they become philanthropists and they support the nonprofit and charitable sector. And so I think the combination of factors that we've put in place to attract entrepreneurs and business creators, it's working.
Because of the war in Ukraine and Russia, we took a lot of people from Ukraine in, a lot of kids with their families. A lot of immigrants come here, a lot of people move here. Our schools were and are bursting at the seams. You needed to get creative with Minister Nicolaitis and Cabinet and come up with a new plan. It's unprecedented what you were doing. Can you tell us about the plan to build new schools in Alberta, the money you were allocating to it?
The government was building about 19 schools a year. And that was fine when we had sort of a predictable, regular enrollment growth. The surge that we've seen in the last 3 years, I think, caught everyone by surprise. It's part of the reason why you're now having a backlash that is happening, quite frankly, in every province in the country, and why everyone had to put pressure on the federal government to take a more realistic approach to how many newcomers we can actually absorb in our economy. That being said, we now know that we have a huge number of families who've come here, and so a large number of kids who are going to need that care, and our job is to build the schools. So we've increased the amount of schools that we're going to build to 30 per year. We think we need 200,000 new school spaces by 2030. And the model that we're going to use is that we're going to build and own the facilities so that we can make sure that we're managing them over a longer period of time and paying for them over a longer period of time. And it's allowed us to really accelerate that growth. We want to make sure that we're not building too much too fast, because the private sector is also booming. They've got a lot of homes to build.
That's right.
And if you try to pile too much construction in all at once, it can just cause inflation as well. So we do believe that we've got the right balance. We're going to have to keep on monitoring and recalibrating that. But it is we want to be very welcoming to those who are coming here to help build our economy and looking for good jobs, and that means that we've got to keep up with growth.
For sure. Let's look back to last summer. Boy, it was a tough summer with what happened in Jasper. Obviously, the wildfires, and I know you were up there shortly thereafter. Maybe touch on Premier what we were able to do. And the relationship with the federal government, there's some thorny issues there as to whose jurisdiction it all is. Look, people at the end of the day, they just want to know their communities are safe, and we're doing all we can do.
Yeah. We knew we were going to end up with this challenge because we already have experienced this challenge of federal jurisdiction when it comes to managing fires. Todd Loewen, our Forestry and Parks Minister, he managed over 1,000 fires and managed to have about 1/3 less area burn than last year. We've got a new system for fighting fires, and yet when you look at some of the biggest problems that we've had in Alberta with out-of-control fires, a lot of it's happening on federal land, whether it's First Nations, so land held in trust, or parks like we see in Waterton a few years ago and Jasper more recently. So we want to have some kind of unified approach to managing all of the overgrown fuel that is around those places. And we did end up with unified command after the fire hit in trying to get things restored so people could return. We had asked for a unified approach when it came to recovery, and we're just very disappointed. It's a revolving door of ministers who is taking the lead on this. I think it started with Harjit Sajjan, went to Guilbeault, went over to Randy Boissonneau, went for a time to Sean Fraser. Now, I don't know who's in charge. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to take the lead, is the people of Jasper deserve to have some consistency as they're building towards transition housing and as they're building towards getting their old properties cleared and getting their new properties built. And so it's a frustrating experience because we stand ready to help, but having Parks Canada bureaucrats stand in the way and say you can't do that when we know that it's going to impair the ability to redevelop. We're working through it. Seniors Community and Social Services Minister Jason Nixon, if anyone can do a breakthrough with the feds, I think it's him. But at the moment, we've been told that our help is not wanted, that they do not want us to build homes in temporary homes in Jasper, and so we're trying to sort through how we're going to manage that, because we know those folks are going to need a place to stay while they're rebuilding.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd want to argue with Minister Nixon. He's pretty convincing. He can be very convincing. Okay, so it's been an amazing year. It goes by in the blink of an eye. But when your feet are close to the fire, it just seems like you're constantly in it. So you've now had a full year as Premier. It's been nearly 2, but a full year. Anything surprise you about 2024 that you will look back on and say, wow, did I learn from that, or I didn't expect that?
Well, what surprises me is how something is the most important issue of the moment, and then a year later, we're not even talking about it. And when you think of what we were talking about at the beginning of January, it was our failing power grid. It was that we had all this instability in our power grid. It was that prices had spiked up to 32 cents a kilowatt hour. And here we are at the end of the year going into a new season where we might have those troubles, and we've got more baseload power on stream. We've got actually an oversupply of electricity. Prices have come down, and my affordability and utilities minister, Nathan Neudorf, is in the middle of a major restructuring of our electricity market. So that's surprising. The other thing that's surprising is things that were not an issue at all a year ago, and now it's the only thing we're talking about today. And it's connected to electricity, but it's AI data centers.
That's right.
I don't even think that was really very strongly on our radar, but when we got into the summer, all of the investment meetings that we had through Invest Alberta and round tables, everyone was saying, we need AI data centers and we think you're the place for it. So we had to really work to put together a cross-ministry committee so that we could develop some policy and say, yeah, we're open for business. You want to bring some data centers here? Great, bring your own power. And so that, I've been very, very pleased that you can identify some issues and solve them. I should maybe mention another one, because we have the Public Service Awards each year. And we do public service awards for innovation, and it really does identify how quickly our public service moves. So we were at the beginning of the year dealing with an encampment crisis in Edmonton. There were over 700 encampments. The courts were standing in the way of Chief Dale McPhee being able to clear those, and so we quickly put together additional shelter beds, and quickly put together a navigation center. And lo and behold, this idea that came out of necessity has turned into a pretty darn good model for how we should coordinate between about 10 different services in our big cities. We have served over 4,000 people in the Edmonton Navigation Center. We rolled it out in Calgary in July and have served over 2,000 people. We're now working on a plan for how we can apply this model in mid-sized communities, and we gave an award to the hardworking team at SCSS who came up with that. So that's, I guess, I could probably come up with a few more, but we gave out 17 awards to individuals and to groups within our public service. And I think that's kind of an indication that we move pretty fast, but boy, there's some departments who can really keep up with us.
2 more quick questions. The Greenline in Calgary, changing by the day. What is happening?
I think that my frustration that I saw with the Greenline is that, they told us it was going to be a $4.4 billion project, and it was going to be 40 kilometers stretching all the way from the north of the city at 160th Avenue all the way to the south at Seton. And so we put a pledge forward, as did the federal government. And then it kept changing, and it kept getting smaller and smaller and more expensive. And then finally, by the time it got down to this little stub of a line from Eau Claire to Linwood, we just had enough is enough. Like, how can we continue to see this escalation? So we wanted to work with the city to see if there was a way that we could do an above ground option. It's always more expensive to tunnel than it is to do elevated or to do at grade. And we were putting it to council. Is it yes or no? And so it just seems to me, I have to ask the question, if it had been a $20 billion project proposed to us, because that's what it's looking like it would be to build the whole thing, would the federal and provincial governments have agreed to come in on 1/3, 1/3, 1/3? Probably not.
Yeah.
And if Calgarians knew what the real price tag was, that it was $20 billion, would it have gotten this far before somebody said, like, hold the phone here, we've got to take another look at this? We're just trying to avoid a boondoggle. These are big projects, and there's always an opportunity cost. When you spend $20 billion on one project, it means that there's $20 billion that you can't spend on other projects. And so we're now at a point where we think that there is a line that will be used. It's a down payment on what that future proposal will be, which may now take decades to do. Everybody knows that we're committed to trying to get that line built, and it's up to the City of Calgary and Calgarians to decide if they want to work with us on it or scrap it.
Okay. Something tells me there's much more to come on that in 2025,
Yeah,
which would lead me to my last question. What will you see as the biggest challenges or opportunities lying ahead for you and for this province in 2025?
A lot of the challenges that I knew we needed to address, I think, are already underway. The worry that you have, because I had to campaign on some pretty tough issues. I had to campaign on healthcare reform, because my view is that you really do, if you're going to make some very foundational changes, you've got to get buy-in from the public. It wasn't an easy election, but I'm grateful that the majority of Albertans said, yeah, let's do it, it's time to do it. We've got major changes that we need to make on our mature asset strategy. We've got a $30 to $40 billion liability of wells that are either suspended or inactive or underperforming. We've got to deal with that. Because it's been just kicked forward decade after decade. We have done a major new approach to how we think like an owner, as Peter Lougheed might have said, on how we manage our oil and gas resources and get them to market. That's going to require a lot more work. Education, we've talked about. Some major pressures that we have in seniors, community, and social services. There are people who are moving to Alberta because they hear about all the great supports that we have, but it's putting additional pressure on. So we have to figure out how to meet that additional demand, because we're just seeing long waiting lists. The daycare file, the conditions that the federal government put on us have made the program unavailable to a large number of people who need it. So I think we've identified, and I could go on. I think the challenge was you have to identify the problem so you can start working on the fixes, because it can take a few years before we're able to get to the finish line on some of them. I think we've identified all the problems, but just when I say that, a new one crops up.
Yeah, that's it. Well, look, you have a lot on your plate, and you've got a wonderful, capable team of ministers around you and a good supporting cast. But make sure, Premier, that you do us all a favor. Take a few days for yourself and your family over the holidays. Get a break, because we need you fully charged coming into the new year. Thanks for doing this. We always appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. I'm looking forward to it, and Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you. Premier Danielle Smith on the Alberta Update, looking back at the year 2024 and a look ahead into 2025. And a reminder, we will be back with regular Alberta updates for you, picking it up mid-January. We look forward to bringing you the news you can use, what your province is up to. So thanks for being with us for this special edition. Happy New Year.